Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,300 comedians for nearly
Well,
50 years. I am delighted to welcome my guest today. It's the one and only Mr. Phil Nichol.
oh, thank you. Yeah.
Hey!
Yeah. Applause for the deaf. Applause for the
Hello!
deaf. Hello, Rich. Did you just say 50 years or 15 years?
50.
50. So you would have seen my first gig when I was 7.
Well,
Amazing.
that was my first ever gig when I was seven.
Yeah.
It was Les Dawson for me.
Was it? Wow.
Scarborough, and then on holiday, and then a year later it was Tommy Cooper.
Amazing. Wow. Amazing.
I got the bug then.
That's amazing. And I remember one of my first, when I was about 12, my parents in Canada, my parents are Scottish. They took me to see a panto at the what's the name of the O'Keefe Center,
Oh
and the
yeah.
O'Keefe, and it was Lionel Blair
Oh, fantastic.
and it was Lionel Blair doing Jack and the Beanstalk, and I remember it really clearly because I got asked to go. At the end of it, Lionel Blair, it's like a 2,000 seat, 2,500 seat theater, like the Apollo. Does anyone want to come up on stage and get some kids up on stage? I was 12, mind you. The kids you normally got were like 5 and 6 and 7. And I rushed from the back screaming, "Ah!" all the way down and climbed up on stage. And they put me in the back of the queue because he's a master. And he spoke teaching the kids, they gave him the candy. And he went down, and he got to me, and he gave him a little kiss, put them, let them like guided down to the seats, and then got to me, and I can't. He went to kiss me. I went, oh, first big laugh I've ever had in my life. 2,500
Fantastic.
people.
That's
I
so
reckon. I
funny.
reckon. I reckon it was one of those moments that made me think, oh, I think I can do this. Actually, yeah. And since then, I've worked with Lionel Blair because I'm friends with his son Matt,
Yeah.
who is a guitar player and plays with Christy Newton. And then Matt played in my show, The Hero Worship. And then I met Lionel and asked Lionel to be in a play that I was producing, The School for Scandal. So it came full circle.
No, I didn't see
In
that.
my later life, I got to work with Lionel Blair, the man that started me off on my comedy journey. There you go.
That is amazing. That
That's
is
great.
fantastic. What a
Good story.
story.
Good story. And
Well,
it's true.
indeed, I've no doubt it is. Thank you so much for doing this. I've been after you for ages to come on and be a guest for this. I'm so
Uh,
delighted. Um, we're gonna.
yes, actually, those late night emails are really starting to become a bit of a pain, Rich, to be honest. But I've given in. I've given
Well,
up.
thank you again. Um, so we're going to go right back to the start of your career, and can you tell me, please, how did you become a comedian in the first place?
Oh my gosh! Well, that is well. We've heard the beginning, the early rumblings of my performing career. I went to acting school. I went to the University of Windsor in Ontario, Canada. It's got a Bachelor of Fine Arts acting degree, which is like a practical acting degree. I had when I was young and I was in my teen years, I used to do these school plays, and our school had a theater in it, and we always went to the Sears Drama Festival. And the Sears Drama Festival was like a countrywide youth theater festival. And when I got into my school, I kind of took over as the one of those kids that's really annoying. And our school got to the finals of the Sears Drama Festival, and one of the awards we were given, one of the prizes we were given, was an afternoon with Keith Johnson, who just sadly passed away. And Keith Johnson, if you don't know about Keith Johnson, he is the guy that invented improv and wrote the book called Impro. And if you've got any acting or improv background, you'll know who I'm talking about. But you wouldn't have the the Comedy Store Players. You wouldn't have Whose Line Is It Anyway without
Wow.
Keith Johnson. So when I was about 15, I took a workshop with Keith Johnson and with my school. And at the lunch hour, he came over to me and went, "Have you done this before?" And I was like, "No, I'm just making it up as I go along, Keith." He was like, you, and he brought Frank Luke, who's my teacher at the time, who was one of the most important people, and he gave me a card and said, "Call Aubrey Schweiber the guy that runs the Toronto theater sports,
Yeah.
get a team together and go and play theater sports. So that's kind of how my comedy career started, meeting Keith Johnson. Then I went to acting school. Then while we were in acting school, at the last year, we were all living in a university house with a couple of guys who dropped out and were selling pot to get by. But we had no money, we had no gas, we had no electricity. One of the guys had a great big dog called Daisy, which was an English sheepdog. We used to like let Daisy climb on top of us to keep us warm. And an ad came up in the local paper, in the Lance, the Windsor newspaper, for a comedy contest run by Labatt's. The Labatt's Crystal Comedy Contest. Like at that time, I think it was called the Labatt Schooner Comedy Contest, and we entered it. Me and Joe Costa and Sean Cullen. We decided to put a team together, win some money, turn our electricity back on, and so overnight we came up with the name Corky and the Juice Pigs. We devised 7 minutes of material. Some of it was like really bad material, like the Flintstones in a punk rock style. But because the three of us were performers and Sean was so funny looking, yeah, we won our contest. And then the contest meant that we appeared on national television on the Global Comedy Network with Eugene Levy. It was playing a character called Bobby Bittman that he made famous in the SCTV show. He was the host of the show. So my very first contact with comedy was performing on Global Television Network with Eugene Levy at the age of 21. We didn't win that contest, by the way, but we should have. And then within 2 years, we were performing worldwide, and we had been on the Dudley Moore Comedy Club special. That would have been in about 1989, and I would have been about 23 years old.
That is incredible, because I mean, I have seen you many, many, many times,
yeah,
in many different guises. I've seen you as an actor. I've seen you going mad with a guitar. I've seen you as a comedian. I've seen you doing monologue. You do all sorts. I've seen the improv. I've seen all sorts of different facets to
thanks, Rich.
your comedy career.
Yeah.
It fascinates me. Your confidence on stage knows no bounds.
Really?
And I say to a lot of the comedians I talk to, it must all be down to experience. The more you do, the better it is. Is that correct?
Well, you know what? I'm not a very confident human being.
Wow.
I struggle. I know, right? If you don't know me, it's a mad struggle for me to. I think I grew up. It's a lot of our trauma is based in childhood, and my trauma, even though it's not a great trauma, it is still. I moved from Scotland when I was 4. Right. And then I moved back to Scotland when I was about 5.5. And then I moved back to Canada when I was 8. And between the ages of 8 and 9, I went to about 10 different schools. I was born with a clinical stutter and a lisp. Oh. So I wasn't able to voice my opinions or speak very clearly. I was the youngest of 3 boys. I was born into a born-again Christian family. I wasn't allowed to wear denim. My parents were very strict with me. I wasn't allowed to watch films or TV like other kids. I had to watch what my parents told me to watch. And although I adore them deeply, I think my sense of insecurity that's been driven by that journey has turned me into the biggest loudmouth. And my way of covering up for my insecurity is to try to be the loudest and funniest guy in the room, which is almost a cliche for comedians, because most of the comedians I know deep down have some deep down sad sack, lonely kind of just feeling very lonely. And I think that has driven me. Not being secure has driven an appearance of being secure.
That is so fascinating, because if ever you see your live performance, if I was to see your live performance, I know if I see your name on a bill, I'm going to have a great time.
Oh, thanks, Rich.
you will not leave the room until everybody is crying with laughter.
Well, I do. I do have a drive in me, and I don't know. It is from a deep insecurity that I feel bad if I have left a comedy club experience or a theatrical experience any kind of performance experience without giving the audience as much of myself as possible. And I know that sounds a bit cheesy, and I don't mean it to sound like I give my as much of myself as possible. I think I have it's underlying insecurity is I really need to be loved and I really want to be liked, and therefore I can't do less than 100%.
Well, you are my friend, big time. You
Yeah.
massive fan here.
Oh, well,
Absolutely,
thanks, Rich.
just the best. Um, the next question, I'm expecting an incredible answer to, because it's, what do you like to talk about on stage? Do you have any form of idea what you're going to do or say when you go?
Well, I mean, I have many different facets of my comedy character. Having done Corky and the Juice Pigs for 10 years and
Yeah.
developing a style where we were very punk rock, we were very transgressive. We try to say the unsayable, but from an angle where it was a defendable, in that we would never feel like what was now be considered punching down. That was never even a consideration in the late 80s. But we were always good-hearted and good-natured, and from a deep belief that comedy is a balm for the sadness of the sadness that life is a very difficult, hard, torturous for some people, and we were always trying to alleviate that pressure, and also alleviate the pressure for an audience who are onlookers to that life. So we said the unsayable, sang the unsingable, and I tried to approach hard topics from oblique angles so that we could find the humor in it, because I believe that humor is the thing that will save the human population. That art and humor and kindness, the humor is filled with kindness and generosity and understanding. And so we were always trying to find, even in some of our darkest material, trying to find the light that allowed people to release the tension from it. And I think that comedy has changed quite a lot in now. You be very careful of your topics. Shows I talk about things that are meaningful to me, things that have really happened, and I try and describe why I've had epiphanies, how I've grown, and why I've grown through being very confessional about being a real fucking dickhead. And and I think that's where my favorite comedy comes from, is from people recognizing that that we're twats and human beings are capable of all sorts of nonsense, and admitting it.
I always say to people with my blog and my podcast, what is not to love? Comedy is such a wonderful thing, and to go and to laugh is just magical. And it's got to be live. It's got to be within a room at any given point, because you just do not know what's going to happen, and that's the wonder of watching somebody like you, because you're so left field and off, and it's just fantastic.
Well, stand up is a live art form.
Yeah.
As we've learned from doing Zoom shows and stuff, it works. It can work, but you can read it. Sometimes you can read someone's jokes. That's great, but it's a live art form. It's about the energy and the commitment and the intimacy that's built between a comedian and an audience. And it doesn't matter whether they're a great comedian or not, or a new comedian. They still, the audience needs to be on side. They need to trust that the person standing in front of them is deeply centered. It doesn't always work out that way, but I think one of the things that pushes most of the great comedians I know, and people I've worked with and grown up with, have developed really deep centers, and know, whether you agree with them or not, they have their compass and they are sticking to it. And I think that's what I tried. If I've achieved nothing else in my life, I have found my moral compass, and I stick to it.
What do you think makes a good comedian?
What makes a good comedian?
Hmm.
Well, personally, the comedians that I like are people that seem true to themselves, and they're not in it. I think we live in a world where a lot of young comics are coming through because they see where success can take you, and not necessarily why they don't quite understand why they're doing comedy. They may well be funny, but they're not. I mean, so comedy is uh, it's almost like a need.
Yeah.
I think I find all of my friends, I know most of my friends are comedians, or a lot of my all comedians are my friends, but there are people that just need to find the light in the middle of the darkest place. Um, and even if that's just a complaint or a niggle, or a pun, I think people that can find the humor, um, they just says it's a need, isn't it?
Very much
And
so. Yeah.
so many comedians I've spoken to who start out, where they do one gig, one show, and they get the bug. I mean, this is probably really common, and you could ask people. They do one show and they get the bug. They love it, and they have to do it again and again and again. And I think it's that simple. I think if you just realize I really enjoy making people laugh, it's almost an unconscious need to connect to people emotionally.
It is, I think, and as I said, what's not better than to go out and to make people laugh? It's the most joyous thing. It's when I started the blog, I thought this is a great idea because nobody's ever, as far as I'm aware, done it from an audience point of view. When you're sitting in an audience and
Mm,
watching all this incredible talent
yeah.
come out and just make you laugh, it's just a wondrous thing. Um,
Yeah, but maybe we could talk about it forever because
yeah,
why we laugh. I mean, there's been psychological studies done on it. It's renowned to be healthy. Laughter is the best medicine, but they've actually done studies. It is good. Sends oxygen to the brain, but I think it connects people, and the connectivity of comedy is, especially in this country, in the UK. People love laughter here, and I think it imbues the entire culture. Their need to understand each other comes through their laughter, comes through their understanding of comedy. So, but anyway, that sounds all cheesy.
I should I should
That
I should get my laugh insured.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
um, I can't ever imagine you having a bad gig because you're such a funny man.
No, I've had some bad gigs.
What I was going to ask you, what has been your best and worst ever gig? Do any come to mind?
um, my best gig. Well, best gigs are hard to best gigs are hard to choose because I don't know how you choose that best gig. You mean
Yeah.
by size?
So has something happened in that gig that has made you think this is wonderful, this is really good, I feel great, it's flying?
I don't. Yes. I mean, I know. I'm sort of be a bit cryptic or weird about it, but I don't think I've had my best gig.
Right.
Hopefully, therefore, it's because it's always different. My best gig for me personally is when I enjoy it, and when I feel like I've felt loose and connected to the audience and felt like I've got them there. They trust me, and we're in a pocket, and I'm getting the best laughs. And certain jokes get better responses than other jokes,
Yeah.
but you get a night where from the very beginning to the very end they are with you on absolutely everything. Now, but best gig could also mean my best gig could have been, maybe my in 2006 when I won the Edinburgh Comedy Award, and I did a gig at the Garrick Theatre, and it was 800 people, and I was filming it, and it was amazing, and it was like a show from my heart that had started with a little tiny backstage, playing to 50 people a night at the stand, not expecting any glory, and that's not why I was doing it, to then play it in front of that 800 people. That could be seen as the best gig. But I think the best gigs for me are when it's unexpected and something
Yeah.
beautiful happens, something different happens that takes the gig away from being a gig, and still ends up. I remember I think the Comedy Farm. I'm just remembering things now. I just end up being naked and running across through the tent, being chased by the other guy who was naked, and then I'm running through the tent and off into the field, and then I kept running, and I turned around and he was running after me, and we must have been like hundreds of yards from the tent, and you could still hear them laughing. That was quite a nice gig.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what happened to the gig. For me, I just felt emotionally attached to that, because whatever had led up to me allowing us to be that free was wonderful.
That's brilliant. That's so good.
On the other hand, bad gigs for me are when I feel like I'm not connecting. I had a gig at the 100 Club, and it was for someone from the BBC had set up the gig, and I was on with Matt Berry, and I was on with, like, it was a pretty impressive bill. I think maybe Greg Davis was there. Anyway,
Yeah.
I just remember this big pressure, high pressure gig, and the audience was like packed, but it was sort of young comedy fans and young BBC-esque styles. And that is not my crowd. That's not my audience. I'm a live act.
Yeah, you are.
I'm not interested in their subtle qualifications of what is funny and what isn't. I remember it not going well, but that one hurt me. I did a corporate gig once where for Bartender of the Year at the Grosvenor, which I was being paid a lot of money for, and was being paid for by GQ magazine. Yeah. And I did it went totally downhill. And I remember walking down all the way down the road in Marble Arch, crying, bawling my eyes out, thinking I should never have got into comedy. What am I doing? This is absolutely the worst. And I remember calling my agent at about 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, and saying, I can't do this anymore. And she was like, Phil, it's a corporate, blah, blah, blah. But for me, those are bad. Like, they don't really matter, because you could see the reasons why those weren't good gigs. The gigs that go bad for me are ones where I feel like I'm not connected to an audience and I can't win them over. And I remember there's a funny one, finally. I'm assuming that's what this podcast is trying to make you laugh somehow. So one of the funny ones that I remember was in Singapore at the American Club. I think might have been called the Sit Down Club anyway. Very clever. And I was on with Kerry Marks, who reminded me of this, that I went on last. And in Malaysia and in Southeast Asia and Singapore, if you touch another man on the head, it's really offensive. But no one had told me that. This was my very first trip to Singapore. And in Singapore at that time, and it may have changed now, it was illegal to be gay. It was against the law, and they would put you in prison for being gay. And I so I went on stage, and my act at the time began with me. It was all women in the front and one Asian guy sitting in the very front row. So I have no other choice but to go up to the Asian man, and I bonk him on the head with my microphone, because I used to bonk people on the head with the microphone. So of course I run out, and then bonk someone in the head with the microphone, and the whole place goes silent. Normally it gets a huge applause, like a hilarious. So I think there's something wrong, so that they didn't hear it. So I do it again, bang the man on the head, and it's even worse now. And then I'm going, no, I'll just try it one more time, because I'm pretty sure this always gets a laugh. I bonk him in the head. There is silence. And so I'm like going in my mind, I'm going, so I'm like, the beginning of my routine was, I used to do this character, a hunchback, where I'd go suck my ass. And so I'm now struggling to figure out why this isn't funny. So for some reason, I thought it was really funny to turn to him and go, suck my ass, suck the ass of a hunchback. Still silence. And then some English bloke in the back goes, "You don't know where you are, mate." And I'm like, I don't know what that means. So I then go, because I've got a routine about Americans. Of course, so I'm like, any Americans here? And the one person who puts his hand up is the guy in the front row who I've just bonked in the head and stuck my ass in his face. Um, the audience, people were getting up and leaving at this point because I think they all thought they were going to get arrested. I played to virtual silence for the rest of my show because I had no idea. I had no idea what I had done.
Wow.
It was so transgressive.
What
And
a
I got
bad
off
gig.
and I think the guy that ran the club, I think his name was Kerry, not Kerry Marks, but Kerry with a K. He just went, "That's the worst comedy act I've ever seen here in my life." And I had three more nights. I had three more nights.
That's
So
brilliant.
that
That's so good.
that may be the worst comedy set I've ever done.
You see, with your routines, they are fearless, absolutely fearless.
Well, well to work they have to be. In that
Yeah.
case, it, in that case, I didn't even know why it had gone wrong.
Because I'm moving on to how do you cope with any nerves, if you get any, before you go on stage?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very nervous.
Even now?
Yeah, I think that's all part of the joy of performing is
Yeah.
the nerves. I think a comedian that says they're not nervous is lying, or bored.
Yeah.
So I get really nervous, and the more nervous I am, the better the show, because what happens is between how I deal with this is I use all of my my acting school training, but I do breathing exercises and try and calm myself down.
Yeah.
But then when I get on stage, it's gone like that. The minute that you step, so I'm just burping. The minute you, I think the minute you step on stage, you start
It goes.
performing, and the first laugh, it all disappears.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But to cope with it, I sometimes have to go for a long walk. If it's colder, I prefer to get outside the building and get a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
And a lot of comedians will say they prefer showing up right before they're supposed to go on, so that they don't feel it. And
Yeah.
sometimes when we do these tour gigs and you're traveling with another group of comedians, and if you're on last, you have to be, what you have to be in the room and watching other people,
Yeah.
and it makes me really nervous. But I've learned to cope. I've learned to cope.
Good man. Other than this podcast, the most creative thing I've ever done was write a play for the Edinburgh Fringe.
Oh yeah, nice.
And we put it on for comic relief, me and my mate, and
Yeah.
it's called The Applicant, and it's about
Right.
basically me coming down from Carlisle
Right.
to my first job in London. I've never had an interview, and it's a series of interviews.
Right.
So my mate played all the interviewers, and there was me from Carlisle doing the monologues and talking to the audience about trying to get a job. I had a successful girlfriend, etc., etc. So I wrote and we performed. We rehearsed this for about 10 weeks, and the first night I ran out there, I completely forgot my monologue, and I was just blurbing words at the audience.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, I wrote this. What is going on? And yet, as soon as my friend come on, you could banter from him because there was somebody else on stage, and we got back into it. Do you find that the same with comedy, or is acting your reading from words, or you're learning from words on a page? But do you think the comedian has different tools to combat that?
Well, I can't speak for other comics, but
Yeah,
I've gone through when I was in a West End show called Everybody's Talking About Jamie, which is
yeah,
a West End musical, and I have been acting for the greater part of my life, but I had an experience. I've never really experienced stage fright, as people talk about. I've always been nervous before I've gone on, but I've always been. I think because of my background with my speech impediment, that I don't get very nervous about speaking. Oddly, I mean, It's kind of, I'm so used to having been made fun of that's like, you can't, well, make fun of me then. But I was in the play, everybody's talking about Jamie, and I went through a period of a 2 week period where I suffered severe stage fright, where I didn't want to go on.
Oh
And it's
man.
a visceral feeling. And I found myself on stage, suffering dry mouth and being, it's a horror. Anyone that's suffered this will understand it's a most horrifying feeling that you could possibly have, where you don't know what you're supposed to say next or
Yeah.
where it's going to come from. And you're looking at the other actor and they're looking at you thinking, come on, come on. And what feels like an eternity to you is actually a split second for the audience. And just like, come on, where's the lines? What am I talking about? Where am I? And the whole room starts like sort of going, getting bigger and smaller.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's inexplicable. It's an inexplicable fear. And all you want to do is run off the stage.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can't. So you're stuck. And it's the most terrifying feeling in the world. And when people talk about terrifying comedy being terrifying, I mean, that's what they're talking about. That moment. They don't want to be stuck in that moment. And I think performers just have to overcome it.
Well, certainly the second and third nights that we did, I was word perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I remember, here's a good story, right? I was on a tube on my way somewhere, and it was a packed tube, and an old man got on. He was a big tall guy like you, Richard, but must have been in his 80s, maybe older. And this is many years ago. This is like 15, 20 years ago. And I stood up to let him sit down, as you would do, and he went, no, son, I don't get up, because if I sit down, I can't get back up again. And I said to him, I said, there was another, because it was packed, there was a woman standing beside him, and I was like, well, do you want to sit down? She sits down, and he goes, and I'll tell you what, son, I'm 89 years old.
Wow.
I'm 89 years old. And I was like, how old people like to announce how old they are. 89 years old, and I fought in World War II. And he starts telling me the story. He goes, and I was 15 years old, and they wouldn't let me into the army. And then when the day I turned 16, I conscripted myself, I joined the army, and I got put in a tank. I got put in a tank that go on the D-Day landings, and there was 5 of us in the tank on D-Day, and only 10 of those tanks that landed at D-Day survived the entire war. And of all the tanks, only 2 of the tanks survived. All 5 of the men in the tanks survived the war. And so there's 5 of us in that tank from D-Day till the end of the war. And now there's only 2 of us left alive. The other 3 blokes are dead. And my wife passed away about 10 years ago. And my friend Harry, who I'm going to see today, his wife passed away about 5 years ago. And I've got to see him. I go and see him one day, and he comes to see me the next day. And we were the only crew to survive World War II in our tank, and our tank was one of the last 10 tanks that landed in D-Day on D-Day. And I've done this my entire the last 5 years. I've seen this guy, and I was like, oh my God, that's spectacular. I mean, that's amazing. So I know. And what do you do, young man? I said, well, I'm a comedian. He goes, well, that's a tough job, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
That's the people's biggest fear, is standing in front of people and not knowing what the fuck you're supposed to say.
Exactly. That man was so true, because you're not.
Well, I mean, he fought in World War II.
You're not a doctor or a surgeon. Your sole purpose is to go and make people laugh.
I know.
However, the nerves, because it's you versus them, the nerves will still be there.
If they don't laugh, it's horrible.
Yeah. Following on from that, how do you remember all your routines? Do you have pointers in your head? Do you write things down? Do you?
No, you just
I thought not.
Yeah, I just perform. I try and perform most nights.
Yeah.
And I have done. I set off when I was very young to be a stage performer.
Right.
Because of the way I was raised, Richard. I didn't really watch television or films.
Right.
And I was I wanted to be, when I was 12, we went to the Stratford Festival in Stratford, Ontario, Canada.
Yeah.
We have our own Shakespeare festival. And I was sitting amongst this whole sold out crowd, it was all students, and they were all talking and spitting spitballs at each other, and the teachers are trying to quell them all down. And at one point, the character of Ariel, it was the Tempest. The character of Ariel, the actor, his name was Nicholas Pennell. He dropped about 40 feet from the ceiling. He came out of nowhere and then stopped, and the light lit up, and he was in this, his wingspan was huge, and his voice was of Ariel, and he does this amazing, and the entire room stopped. All these like teenage students stopped and went, "Oh my God." And I thought, I want to do that. I want to be able to shut up 800 high school students and have them stop and watch me. And that was about when I was about 12 years of age. Wow. And that is what I have been striving for, striven. That's what I've been striving for ever since. So the idea of not knowing where you are or not being able to remember your words, you know, that doesn't come into
no. You just go out there and perform. Let's move on to Edinburgh, because every year I'm very lucky to spend my holiday at the Edinburgh Fringe. I've been going since 2005.
Yeah.
And I've only missed 2 because of the pandemic. And I go for a week, I see about 50 shows, and I need a holiday by the time I come back. I want to read you some of the many different sorts of shows I've seen you in. And this is, you're so brilliant at what you do. I first saw you at dear old Nicholas Parsons' Happy Hour running in an afternoon audience in 2005. I then saw you in Talk Radio.
Stuart Lee directed Comedians Theatre Company.
Yeah. Then True West and Killer Joe, all in 2007 and 28.
Yeah.
I've seen you perform at Leighton Live. I've seen you the School for Scandal. Mervyn Stutter, of course. You've been at many of his Pick of the Fringes. What a lovely man.
I have.
It's his 30th year, and he's been on here. He's just been wonderful. I've seen you also in London for Frank Skinner, and I've seen you at the Comedy Store in London. And we went back to Edinburgh in 2019, and you did a brilliant play called Huey with... that was superb. Just a little half-hour thing
with Mike McShane.
McShane, yeah. And most recently, Up the Creek headliners at Chiswick in London, and very recently downstairs the King's Head. And I love the fact that you've got all these different strings to your bow. You're an actor, as I said. You're a musician. And you're just the best comedian. It's so good.
Can I quote you on that, Rich?
Yeah, please do.
Rich Gill thinks I'm the best comedian. Awesome. Well, you've seen them all.
Yeah, most definitely. When I see you at Edinburgh, can you tell me what your first Edinburgh Fringe was like? Did you go as a punter? Did you have a solo show? Were you part of another act? What was it like? What year did you go? And what did you think of it?
Well, it was in I believe it's so long ago now. I believe it was 1990.
Wow.
I was in a comedy trio called Corky and the Juice Pigs.
Yeah.
Who we did about 10 Edinburghs. We traveled all over the world with Sean Cullen and Greg Neal, who's one of my deepest, closest friends. And it was our first year. Karen Corn had seen us that year at the Melbourne Comedy Festival. We crashed the Melbourne Comedy Festival, the 3rd annual Melbourne Comedy. We just showed up and made them put us on. We were pretty punk rock. And Karen Corn had seen us there and thought that we were an Australian act and brought us to the Gilded Balloon. And we remember us taking the bus from Glasgow. We flew into Glasgow because you couldn't get a direct flight from Canada to Edinburgh at the time. Took the bus across, got off the bus, the smell of hops, because the breweries were right in the city center. So, that's why that Edinburgh's got that history because of the smell,
Yeah.
the smell of the place. Um, and it was, yeah, I couldn't believe we were like this ancient city coming from Canada. The furthest afield we any of us had been had probably been Florida.
Yeah.
Um, and we did our first show backstage at the Gilded Balloon, the old Gilded Balloon, when it was still on the Cowgate. I believe the act on the main stage when we were on were Vic and Bob.
Oh, wow.
They were on the main stage.
Wow.
We Yeah, there was three of us. We were very young and arrogant and ballsy and funny, I guess. And we did that. We did a sold out run for the Gilded Balloon. We This is back in the day when Edinburgh, you didn't have to have posters.
Mm.
There was a few posters around the place, but it wasn't like it is now, professional poster companies ripping people off. It was you could put your poster up wherever you could find a space for it, and if it got torn down, it got torn down. And we spent £50 total on our poster campaign, and we went and we drew a hand-drawn poster because Sean did cartoons with a stencil set, black
Wow.
and white, and we put them all over the venue. And then we went to a couple of other venues. There was one down the end of Broughton Street, which is a big church, and we used to put our posters up there. But it was mainly word of mouth. We did Leighton Live. We worked. Phil Kay was the host, and we destroyed Leighton Live was like a bear pit, and we went on and just we were fast and loud when we were on with people like I don't even know who the other acts were on. This pre-Rich Hall,
Yeah.
Daniel Kitson. I mean, this going way back. Sean Hughes might have been one of the big acts and
Oh,
stuff.
bless him.
Vic and Bob, and we stayed in a parson's house at the end, the west end of Princes Street, and we there's a square there, and we stayed in a parson's house, and remember Greg me making fun. He'd left all the his silver cutlery out, and Greg used to always going, "I'm going to have that." I'm like, "No, we can't steal from a parson. That would just be bad luck," and we didn't.
I love that. I love the danger.
Yeah, it was an innocent time,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the festival was a fringe,
yeah,
not this commercial mania that it is now, where PRs, agents, and managers are now rule the place and
yeah.
decide what's going to be a hit. When it's not a money grubbing, a parasite filled festival, it was an arts festival, and people like Karen Corn were championing arts, and people that, and the Pleasance and the assembly rooms were championing the arts and championing the art of comedy, and we were very lucky to be a part of it. And I've met Owen O'Neill, some of my longest term friends from that year. Phil Kay was the first person I met at the
Wow.
festival. I walked into the Gilded Balloon, and I walked up to the first person I met, which was a young woman called Julie Harris, I think, who was one of no, Steph Harris, her sister, was one of the people organizing, that's still setting up. And I said to her, "Do you know where I can buy any hashish?" It was our first day there. And she pointed at Phil Kay, who at the time looked like Billy Connolly, big wild hair, a jean jacket. And he went, "Oh, no, I can't sell you any, but I can get you high." We went round the back up, which is now where the Gilded Balloon 2 and 3 is. And
Yeah.
we sat on the steps, and we smoked a joint. And I've been best friends with Phil Kay since I think it's 1990, if I get the
Wow.
year right. Then so long ago, I can't remember, to be honest.
And
It was a different era.
but you go regularly, don't you? You're there nearly every year.
I've only taken 2 years off.
Right.
I took the year of the millennium,
Yeah.
so 2000, and I took another year off in 2014,
Do you
after a really
always
bad breakup.
do you always strive to try something new when you're there? Do you think that's a space for it?
Well, it used to be a space
Yeah.
for it. I think now, and that's not, as my last attempt in 2019 taught me, you can't go up there with a half-baked show.
Right.
But to be honest, in 2006, 2005, I went up with a show called Nearly Gay. I was playing the Stand 2, and the Stand at the time was hugely successful. This is before Daniel Kitson had gotten there, before
Yeah.
Stuart Lee had gotten there. I think Simon Munnery was one of the groundbreakers there, and I followed Simon Munnery to the Stand. And I was doing a show that I liked. I was doing a show that I wanted to write and show that there was like a storytelling. I had a storytelling theme that I'd started in 1998 before Daniel Kitson was a comedian. To just to put it in a frame, I'm not comparing myself to Dan. I love Danny. But in 2005, I did a storytelling show, true stories, all true stories in 2006, only because the stand would allow it. And
Right.
the stand got behind me on it, and I sold those shows out in 2006. The Naked Racist won the comedy award completely out of the blue. Didn't expect it, didn't want it, didn't care. I know I'd given up on that. In 2002, I had done a storytelling show called Things I Like I Lick, and that year Daniel Kitson had won the award. I'm not sure if it was his show Something, which I think was his first show. I think it might have been the Fireworks Talking, but we kind of like all good artists, we enjoyed each other's company.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
spent time together, we worked together, and we influenced each other. And yeah, I think that the Edinburgh Festival has been a huge thing for me. And taking the years off, I felt bad taking those years off. It's now become a much more commercial adventure. It doesn't mean that it's not a great thing, because the amount of art that city spits out in the month of August is, I think, cannot help but affect the world in a good way.
It
And
is incredible.
there's not enough comedians, there's not enough singers, there's not enough dancers, there's not enough jokes, there's not enough plays. If the world would indulge itself more in the arts, and I know it sounds really bad, but I genuinely mean this, we would have less hunger and more understanding, and less war and more understanding. And we need to so although I don't really like the way the Edinburgh Festival's gone, I think the city of Edinburgh is disgusting the way the people are making money off the artists. They may not realize that the artists are the last people to get paid, and they are basically cutting off a fantastic thing for the sake of money. And I feel sad that Edinburgh has gone that way. However, you'll always get great things coming out of Edinburgh, and people make the festival, and the festival is sound.
Well said, my friend. That is so well said. So I 100% agree. Do you have any ambitions as a comedian? Because you are absolutely hilarious on stage. You are relentlessly funny. And I just wondered if you have any ambitions. Do you want to be on TV? Do you want to have your own chat show? Anything like that?
Well, I mean, are you offering? I have lowered my expectations, actually, from those years in the noughties when I was sort of, hyper aware of what the industry and the circuit was like. Of course, I had ambitions,
Yeah.
and I had lots of opportunities. Some went well, some didn't go well. I've had great success in lots of areas. I've
Yeah.
done loads of things I'm really proud of. But of course, if someone wanted to offer me a TV show and a talk show, I would definitely do it, and I know that I could do it. I'm very confident about it with my experience. But it's not my ambition now is just to maintain a happy lifestyle that I've got,
Yeah.
and try and remain happy with it. And ambition wise, I've sold a few screenplays. I nearly had a screenplay made by Warpex that kind of went to die to death at the 11th hour.
Well, that's
So
amazing.
I'm trying to stay motivated for those
Yeah.
things. At the
Yeah.
same time, I'm really, really happy performing live, because that was my goal at the beginning, from that 12-year-old kid, is to be a live performer. And if I can live out the rest of my days doing what I'm doing now, I'll be more than pleased and feel more than successful.
Good for you. Good for you, my friend. Who are your favorite comedians, past and present? I mean, is that too long a question, or?
It's a weird one. I always find that a weird one, because I just like comedians. And
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many, this country particularly, but I'm not a fan where I go, Oh, I'm a big fan of Bill Hicks. I'm a big fan of Dave Chappelle. Or
Yeah, yeah,
I've also been doing it a long time. It's hard to be a fan of people. In Dave Chappelle's case, what an amazing comedian. I mean, he is one of the top 10, top five in the world at this time. When I was in Cork and the Juice Pigs in 1993, he was my support act. So it's
wow,
hard. So it's hard
that's
for me to
incredible.
it's hard for me to be a fan in the way that fans are.
Yeah,
Adam Sandler, um, yeah, there's just that Drew Carey. I've just been around a long time,
no,
Rich. But the biggest influences on me would be someone like Phil Kay, who I
yeah,
think is a tremendous comic. And when he started his freewheeling um, improv style has affected me hugely. His energy and the joy he brings to the stage has affected me hugely. And then I can only state my friends who are like Kerry Marks, who I think is one of the greatest comedy writers, underrated comedy writers this country has ever
yeah,
produced,
yeah,
and performers. But I've lived with him for 10 years, so no one's made me laugh more than Kerry, just by nature of living with someone. Um, and then there's loads of great up and coming comics who, just naturally funny people.
yeah, yeah.
But as far as Billy Connolly was probably the biggest influence, because I was raised in this really weird Christian upbringing. Not weird, it wasn't weird. It was just because of my Christian upbringing. Um, my mother would let us listen to Billy Connolly because they were Glaswegians, but we weren't allowed to listen to the Big Yin sketches about Jesus. And for some reason, she let us watch Dave Allen on TV, and I don't know why. I think it's a sectarian issue with my parents are Protestants, and Dave Allen made fun of Catholics, and then
Funny
made fun
man,
of
like
me.
Dave Allen. Funny
Dave
man.
Dave Allen is one of the greats, and
Yeah,
if
he is.
if you've never looked at Dave Allen,
Yeah.
if you're into comedy, you've got to
I had a
go and check out
chance to
some
go and
top.
see him, and I missed out. I wish I'd gone.
Yeah,
It was his last tour, unfortunately, but I loved him growing up. I
yeah,
really did.
Tommy
Yeah,
Tiernan has
superb.
always I was been deeply supportive of me. He's one of the funniest storytellers in the world,
Yeah.
and all success to him. And then I've got my friends Andrew Maxwell, Ed Byrne, Brennan Burns. I mean, the list goes on.
Wow.
All the people I've lived with: Nick Duty, Nick
Yeah.
Wilty,
Yeah.
Matt Kirshen, who's gone off to
Yes.
be really successful in America. These are my Kirsty Newton. Um, these are my close group of friends, and the people that make me laugh, I guess.
That's brilliant. Just following on from that, like me, do you go to a lot of comedy gigs as a member of the audience?
Well, and I don't
Bringing
work.
up
I
on
work.
now. Say again.
I work all the time. I'm
Of
trying to think of the
course.
last. I think the last time I went to see a comedian. We went to see the last comedian I saw live was Tim Minchin because we're friends, and
Right.
I had a date with my now partner, and we went to see Tim Minchin at the Apollo because Tim was so kind enough to give us some tickets to see it. I went to see Fascinating Aida
Oh,
before
that's
that.
yeah,
They are phenomenal,
yeah,
and I loved it. And then the Flight of the Concords, I've seen
yeah.
it live. Um, but to be honest with you, if I'm not working, which is, 6, 7, sometimes I'll do like 18 nights in a row and then a night
Mm.
off.
Wow.
I don't find myself drifting in. I mean, I've drifted over. I live across from the downstairs at the King's Head, and I
Yeah.
found myself going over there on a Sunday to see who's on. But that hasn't happened with the lockdown and everything. I've just been um, working hell for leather, trying to
Of course. You
maintain my
can
lifestyle.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, if you're on a bill, would you stay and watch the other acts?
Yes, in fact I do all the time. If I can, if I don't have a train to catch. Last night I
Yeah.
left, but there was who was on Jake. Oh, this is going to make me feel bad. I can't. Anyway, the comedians that were on last night. Jake Lambert was on.
Jay
Uh,
Lambert's brilliant.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jake Lambert. I mean, he's one. I've worked with him a couple of times recently, and definitely one of the funniest young
Yeah,
comics I've
he
seen in a
is.
while.
He is. He's
Um,
superb.
but I couldn't stay and watch him. I would like to have stayed to watch him, but I try to get there early and watch the acts that are on first. And I book my own show, so I'm always looking for new younger acts to try and put in. I believe it's important to give back to people, but I also believe it's important to watch people that are better than you,
Yeah.
so that you become better. So getting to watch Al Murray the other night,
Oh,
what a bonus for me. The man's an absolute genius,
he
and his
is. He is.
crowd
He's
work.
superb with an audience and
So
superb with a pint of ale all over me.
yeah, I, I think it's important. I remember Adam Bloom got into
Yeah.
a little minor conflict on Twitter because he simply put that he got tired of, as one of the great comedians of this country's put out, Adam Bloom. He said he was kind of disheartened by the fact that no open spots were waiting around to watch the closing act, because as young comedians we wouldn't leave until the closing act had been on,
Yeah.
because that's the only way that we could see to learn and to get better would be
Yeah.
to watch the closing acts. And we're talking about people like Bob Mills and like the Comedy Store regulars.
Yeah.
We would watch all of them because we learned so much from them. And I think if you're a true comedy fan and a comedian at the same time, which is not, they don't always go hand in hand. I know a lot of comedians that aren't comedy fans, and then you would stay around to watch these acts because you can take away so much from it. But obviously, with trains and carpools and everything, it's not always you're not always able to do that. So.
No. Listen, my friend, this has been a wonderful chat.
Oh, thanks, Rich.
I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. Is there anything else you would like to say? Are you writing anything? Have you got a podcast? What's your social media? Anything?
Well, I'm on Instagram, Philbo2000.
Yeah.
And I left Twitter years ago because I think it's a cesspit.
Right.
I've got Phil Nichol on Facebook, philnichol.com for the website, which I don't keep up that as often. But I do a podcast with David Timms called Songs in the Key of Laugh. So if you go to songsinthekeyoflaugh.com, it's a podcast about musical comedians. And we've interviewed Tim Minchin and Rich Hall, Rialina, and loads of fun people that on there. We're in our 4th season.
Wow.
And writing was, I'm actually just being cast in a new show in Atlantic City.
Congratulations.
That's being directed by Cal McChrystal, who's the inimitable Cal McChrystal, and that starts in June. So I'm going to be away in Atlantic City for most of the year.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
Well, I hope I've sounded nice.
You've been wonderful.
I hope I'm not an arrogant cunt.
I am genuinely looking forward to seeing you live again. When you appeared recently on stage with that guitar, and I was sitting in the front row, I thought, what have I let myself in for? And I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Yes, don't sit in the front row, Rich. Do not sit in the front row.
Listen, my friend, it's been joyous, and thank you so much for your time.
Lovely.
All the very best to you.
Thanks for having me on, Rich.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.